I believe the reason why it can be difficult for people to understand what it means to be transgender is because naturally we all have a yearning for simplicity. And this may arise simply as a form of information compression, because it's vastly easier to remember and regurgitate simple information, so we will simplify and cement basic concepts. But people also appreciate neat stories. Typically, it's expected that for someone to be transgender, they must have yearned for that their entire life. So, for example, if they wanted to be assigned female at birth, it's expected that they always wanted to have their hair cut short, always wanted to play with other boys, and generally lead a tomboyish lifestyle without showing much, if any, interest in their femininity. And it's expected that they would sink into a depression during puberty, and to some, it's expected that they must be seriously depressed, perhaps even self-harming in reaction to their natural puberty, to fit the medical narrative of gender dysphoria. So while some transgender people do hold the story of their transition that follows such beats, for many of us that isn't quite how it goes. I and many others would have had a period before they truly accepted the fact that they're transgender where, subconsciously, their brains would identify that there is a gender identity crisis happening internally, but in a failed attempt to resolve it, you way overcompensate and you lean as hard as you can into your assigned gender. And this is sometimes referred to as performing cisgenderness, or simply just overcompensating in the trans community. In my own experience, I never practically embraced a masculine gender role. I was almost always in mixed gender spaces. I was interested in fairly gender neutral hobbies, and while I'd occasionally play with dolls or play basketball, I never really embraced femininity or masculinity in a major way. However, while I was in a youth theatre club, I was lucky enough to be given the main role in a production of Macbeth, so I decided to do some method acting. I cut my hair down really short and choppy, and I let my facial hair grow out all wild, and I tried to get into working out and whatnot. And the more I indulged in that act, I progressively got, physically sicker. I was unable to sleep, I constantly had panic attacks, and sure, it was effective method acting. I mean, I looked like a physically sick psycho just in time for the theatrical run. But in my personal life, I felt like I was just circling the drain. And it was only when I was in that pit, I was able to accept that this whole masculinity thing just really wasn't for me. And since that point, I'd begun transitioning, and it's nearly comical how much better I feel each day that passes since then. Now, what the actual fuck does any of that have to do with the Pagan Trilogy? The Pagan Trilogy consists of 3 games: Pagan Technopolis, Pagan Emporium, and Pagan Autogyny. I believe these games aren't separate entries in a series, but 3 different instances of one game, and that game is Plaza 96. Plaza 96 is a fictional MMORPG for Windows and MS-DOS systems, developed and published by the Albanian art collective in late 1996, hence the name, Plaza 96. The concept of this fictional game was similar to other MMORPGs of the time. It was a large virtual world consisting of multiple different zones, each containing a mix of fictional and modern elements. So, for example, you'd have a food court down the hall from a boss dungeon. Mainly though, it was just a social network, like Second Life, able to host hundreds of player characters simultaneously. And the lore behind the game states that Plaza 96 officially went offline in early 1997 after certain developments in the lovely land of Albania. These isolated instances of Plaza 96 we play in the Pagan Trilogy are likely, or I assume to be, just private servers, independent of the company's hosting services, that were kept online after the shutdown. I'll be discussing the game elements of the Pagan Trilogy in a sister video to this one, but for now, we'll be focusing on the personal story that unfolds over the course of this trilogy of games. Now, I know what you're asking. Why did Pagan 1 and Pagan 2 just swap places all of a sudden? That's a little secret of mine that I'll explain at a later date, but for now, let's start with the literally second, but practically first game in the trilogy, Pagan Emporium. I believe that the Pagan Trilogy of games depicts a story of a transgender woman, but in this first entry, Pagan Emporium, that transition hasn't yet started. The story opens at the beginning of the overcompensation phase that I discussed at the beginning of this essay. Upon loading in, we're almost immediately greeted by a destroyed statue of the goddess Venus. For the duration of this story, Venus shall act as a symbol of our character's femininity. It's not explicitly stated, but I believe our character herself has decided to destroy any last trace of her own femininity. As you have immediately noticed, our vision is all bloodied and blurred, and will continue to be so for the duration of the game. As we are purposefully denying and intentionally preventing any proper self-reflection, our vision has not only been compromised, but altered, and until we come to terms with what our truth is, it shall remain so. But first, video game stuff. Every entry of the series has an inventory and stats, which is typical of an RPG game, and these are important insights into our developing character. For Pagan Emporium, we have basic weapon, armor, we can also equip a talisman and a blessing. That's all we can equip. Now, both a talisman and a blessing are not internal magic. We're not blessing ourselves here. These are merely tools and external wishes that are being cast upon us. Our stats are more interesting, however. We have 5. Chivalrix, Fire Priest, Murder, Modern Tarot, and Dead Letters. It's an odd mix of seemingly normal stats for a video game and unrelented, kind of nonsensical words, so let's go through them. I'm comfortable enough to admit that some of these I'm more unsure of than others. Again, this essay is simply a theory and a personal interpretation, but there may be metaphors or references that I simply just don't pick up on. To note the immediately obvious things, Chivalrix and Fire Priest are uniquely masculine traits. Chivalrix is in a modern context at least, is a term used to refer to moral actions done by a man in favor of a woman, generally. And while fire is gender neutral in its destruction, priesthood obviously is a role undertaken by men in society, with very few, if any, exceptions. Murder is an odd one though. It makes a reappearance later in the trilogy, so we'll just stick a pin in that for now, and we're going to return to that later. Modern Tarot is an interesting inclusion though. Tarot cards are... well, they make a reappearance later in the trilogy as well, but in Autogeny we don't simply collect them, but practically use them to adjust and buff our stats. Tarot cards are seen as a tool to help someone indulge in a little bit of self-reflection, to explore hypothetical future paths in our lives. And when they appear in Autogeny, the third game, they are authentic to that. However, here in Emporium, they're simply just playing cards that we're using to collect and build a poker deck. The last stat that we have is Dead Letters, and once again, I'm slightly stumped as to what these could imply. In the real world, dead letters usually refer to letters that are failed to reach their destination, and that could be symbolic in this case of poor internal communication. Our character is not picking up on their own hints, they're not properly processing their own mental turmoil simply because they refuse to admit that there's turmoil to acknowledge in the first place. These stats ultimately are meaningless to develop unless we have a goal to achieve, so what are we even doing here? Well, as we are currently in our overcompensating phase, it's time we try to indulge and develop our masculinity. And what is the most masculine act of them all? I would subversively say kissing at the minute. That's the most masculine thing, but there's no lips to connect with, so we're gonna have to do the other most masculine act, which is pulling Excalibur from its stone. We roam pretty aimlessly around this wasteland map, collecting various trinkets, recruiting knights to witness our manly act of pull and shaft, and gambling, until we finally are able to do the act. Now, you and me both, let's get into the headspace of our protagonist. For myself and some of you, this might be a little bit nostalgic. Our protagonist has mentally identified that they are experiencing a gender crisis, so We've destroyed our femininity and we've leaned into our biological masculinity, as that surely was the correct answer. And now we're finally at the peak of that masculinity. We are wholeheartedly expecting to wield this weapon and for our vision to clear and for our health to return. So we go up, we pull on the sword, and it effortlessly pops out of the stone. We get a plus to our chivalric stat, and then nothing. Nothing really happens. Sure, we have the sword, and yet our mental state remains shredded. We return to the temple, and only now that we've received the sword can we be blessed by this collection of phantoms and a painting. We walk past the casino area and use our blessing to bypass a medical barrier. We board a boat and sail away from this land of manhood. But as we do, something changes. Our vision clears and resets, clearing out as the sun finally seems to glow properly again. I believe the metaphor here is very clear. We have honestly tried to embrace our masculinity. We practically cannot be any more manly, yet our gender crisis continues. Our blessing is simply being diagnosed with gender dysphoria. We finally allowed ourselves to seek the actual answer, and now that we have it, we can return to medical staff. We can finally begin our journey. Our biological gender is left behind, and we go on to explore and embrace our true gender, our true self. But what if we didn't? In the secret ending, you can avoid pulling Excalibur entirely. You can cheat your way to the ending, and you never reach that peak of masculinity. So we never could turn back from that masculinity into our real femininity. If you manage to get this ending, you're met with a very intense quote. I want to make it clear, a girl died here. I believe this ending implies that since we never allowed ourselves to sink to the bottom of our mental crisis, we never allowed ourselves to truly begin embracing masculinity. We never accepted the truth or even realized it was there. So we just continue on with our lives, constantly burdened with the mental turmoil we refuse to stew on and acknowledge. I will admit that it freaks me out a little bit to consider that. I do wonder how long it would have taken me to realize the truth, my truth, had I not properly tested myself to such lengths. I would hope that eventually, or I give myself the benefit of the doubt, and I think that eventually I would discover that truth either way. But had I not sunken into that low mental pit, it might have taken me years to discover that truth. And hey, luckily I did. Our protagonist did. And we may continue to explore ourselves. We can finally rebuild and rediscover our womanhood and our femininity. Pagan Technopolis begins with us showing up on the boat from Emporium. Our protagonist's goal is to turn this block of marble into a new statue of Venus by gathering various data tapes and exploring different skills. And your goal, yes your goal is to realize and acknowledge that I was correct in swapping around Technopolis and Emporium, and I do deserve at least a little bit of congratulations and like debatably an ego check. But again, I believe the metaphor here is quite heavy-handed. We aren't literally Venus. Venus is simply just our femininity. It's a representation. But we can't just flip a switch. We need to truly develop and rediscover ourselves and our femininity after we took a sledgehammer to it last time. This time, our stats are biochemistry, dark pyrologony, fox cult magic, philosophy, and cybertrance. Biochemistry is leveled up by collecting injections scattered across the game, but what is the injection? Originally I believed this to be estrogen or some other hormone therapy, since estrogen can be administered via needle. However, it's not until Pagan Autogyny that we explicitly gain our estrogen stat. Now, I have two theories. Theory number one, our protagonist switched from taking estrogen via the needle to taking estrogen via pills. And theory number two, it's evil drugs. It's evil drugs taken for a little bit of funsies, and I'm leaning more towards theory too. Like, I personally spent several months exploring my femininity before I began moving towards medication. It's common and advised to spend some time transitioning before you actually take hormone replacements to get a proper idea of yourself and who you want to be. Our character has decided that indulging in psychedelics is one method of self-discovery, which, like, in fairness, it's not unjustified. Dark Pyrologony isn't a new stat. It's an evolution of our previous skill, Fire Priesthood. It does the exact same thing as it did previously, but we've scrapped the male symbolism, and it's not the only thing that's received that treatment. Fox Cult Magic is where I'm going to need you to get a bucket, dunk it in a septic tank, and walk up to the side of a building, because it is truly time to just start throwing shit against the wall. Like, I promise I stewed on this one for a while, and I honestly cannot see what the Fox Cult in this game could represent. So, in the game anyway, the Fox Cult is a collection of speechless NPCs that wear masks and are surrounded by fox photos and general satanic cult stuffs. You must devour raw rotten flesh, good food from a pile of raw rotten flesh that ups your Fox Cult standing, and once you've fully feasted, you may fully join the Fox Cult and forcefully recollect Excalibur. Except, like our Fire Priesthood, Excalibur is no longer Excalibur. Instead, Excalibur is now simply just a kind of generic magic sword. Don't get me wrong, it's the same blade. I assume the same power soaks its sharp edges, but it's no longer carrying the burdens and responsibilities of masculinity. Not Excalibur doesn't really explain much either, however. Like, I guess foxes are like, they seem to usually be tricksters and such in folklore, but that doesn't really nail down exactly what these are supposed to be. Maybe I missed the memo, but I never consulted with a fox or a cult. My aunt joined her local fox cult like a few years ago, and they never found anything more than like a piece of her pinky finger, I think it was, after the night. Philosophy is... Come on, I don't need to explain that one. That's pretty... Cybertrance is the last one, and it's kinda odd. It could simply represent experimenting with identifying yourself online as a woman in digital spaces. Although, I mean, if there's one thing I wouldn't recommend, it would be identifying yourself as a woman on the internet. That usually doesn't go super duper well. Anyway, after you construct Venus, you're greeted with the final screen of Pagan Technopolis. It's an excerpt from The Question Concerning Technology by Martin Heidegger. Now, we're both looking at the screen, and, you know, you can see and I can see that there's a lot of words here, and some of those words may be really relevant to my theory, my interpretation of what this trilogy represents. But here's a fun fact that some of you may be already screaming at your screens right now, and that fun fact is that Martin Heidegger is a fucking Nazi, like a real deal, whole Wikipedia page Nazi. He was like in the party. Now, if I didn't care that he was a Nazi, or, you know, if I respected the whole separate the art from the artist thing, I would allow myself to isolate his politics from his teachings and read into what this specific excerpt says and explore if it has any relevance to the point in this video. Pagan Autogyny is the final entry of the trilogy, and it's the most fully fledged game of the three. For the first time, we're finally greeted with a login screen. We log in as Vivian, perhaps we've finally decided on a chosen name. We can find our boat again. This time it's crashed, it's sunk in the same area as our new form is being created, perhaps symbolizing that this is the final part of our journey and that we have no plans to return to our old confusion and misery. So at this stage, you know the routine, let's see what we have. Our first and most proud stat is estrogen. We finally at the stage where hormone medications are being used and collected. The body foraging stat is only increased by collecting body parts and assembling them together. The goal in autogyny no longer is to simply make mental discoveries, no more building statues of our femininity. We are now going to actually physically transform. And yeah, obviously in real life, this is done by transforming your existing body and mind, but Pagan Autogyny gamifies the process while making it more crude and more violent. We, the actual player, are the main character, but our form in the game isn't the end goal. We're going to make a body and preserve it with medication. Caffeine is mentioned again during the ending slide, but I believe this is here more so to fit the theme of the setting. I don't believe that coffee is uniquely relevant to transgender people. Poetry seems to be a new hobby of ours, I assume spurred on by our interest in philosophy. And lastly, murder returns. It's kind of odd that we've taken a murder gap between games, but I don't know, maybe we feel more comfortable indulging in masculine hobbies again. We don't feel as insecure about indulging in a slight amount of masculinity. Depending on how you look at it, almost every woman on the planet participates in what would be considered masculine acts. Just because we're a transgender woman doesn't mean we can't do the same. It would be kind of odd if we didn't do the same. As I previously stated, our goal this time is to finally complete our transition, to gain a physical form that fits us. So once again, we roam the world, this time collecting pieces of our true form, and once we collect them all, we arrive at a new temple, assembling and grafting our new body together. Once we do that, the world goes silent. This is it. This is finally it. We're almost done our goal. We walk outside and observe our true form rising from the temple, except something feels wrong. The process is a bit too violent, it's a bit too intense, and then suddenly, failsafe. Our form is deemed a martyr, and there's already been code put in place to contain us, to clip our wings before we can even fly into the open sky. And while we reload the game, our new body has been taken apart completely and trapped back inside the temple. Okay, so what gives? The first mystery is to why are we a martyr all of a sudden? What even is that? Typically a martyr is someone who is killed for their beliefs, typically their fate, which is ironic considering the name of the trilogy, but how is this title even remotely relevant to us? I believe this problem, the failsafe, represents real-world transphobia. We're being called a martyr for our beliefs, but we aren't preaching gospel, we're just trying to exist publicly. The roadblock we've hit is other people, powerful people in this world, enforcing a status quo. They don't want a new type of being to exist in a world that supposedly doesn't support it. There's a fear in upsetting that status quo, and it's easier to contain one martyr than it is to integrate it, so it remains contained. I believe this game is very relevant in the time period we exist now, with the US and the UK sinking into quite conservative and fascist ideals. Women, all women, are once again being suppressed. The reason why the martyr is restrained may be a metaphor for how a lot of the suppression of the queer community, as well as restrictions on women's privacy and rights, is done through the lens of fighting back against transgender people. Ultimately, laws against transgenders cripple the transgender community, the wider queer community, and all women. So maybe this world is seething and rotting, and our existence is being restrained and kept down as a consequence of that hate. No matter how many times you try, no matter how many bodies you make, all are unsupported simply by the nature of their creation. But we can't end here bashing our heads against a failsafe screen. So what can we do? We can kill the people in power. Oh, hold on. Specifically, we need to kill the 4 bosses that remain on the server. They seem to have survived the corruption that most of the other entities in this world suffered. Once we defeat the bosses, we can collect their tarot cards and use their power to perform rituals. These rituals fundamentally change the world of Plaza 96. We've now created an opening to allow ourselves to finally come together and step outside. The world once again goes silent. Maybe this is finally it. For real this time, we can walk outside and observe our form raise higher and higher into the sky, finally unleashed. We hope it can finally escape, roam free and true. But then the game crashes once again. Except this time, the martyr roams free. We finally escaped. We finally can play as our true self. However, when we do, something's wrong. Something's very wrong. The world seems colder, more decayed and threatening. The locations, the items, they all remain the same, but something's different. Unlike Emporium, our vision is clear. Nothing is wrong with us, but the world seems unsettled. When you finally beat Autogeny, you're greeted with this screen. An original poem this time, speaking about this character directly to this character. To break it down, Solar Flared Angel obviously refers to our appearance during our little escape. The blood, the gore, possibly referring to the violence we needed to inflict to be free. Tumbling Towards Dogs is where this poem begins to explain the coldness and the hostility of the world. The poem comments on our bloody new form. It discusses our act, our rebellion. We did martyr ourselves, we fought back, searching for meaning and a rebellious death. And we were left bloody, but we didn't die. We're free. And while yes, the world may seem more hostile, more intimidating to us now that our female form invites violence and harassment, we are entitled to live that honest, true life. The Pagan Trilogy proudly presents a very real story of a transgender woman's experience that isn't afraid to discuss and evoke imagery that doesn't conform to uniform expectations. I personally feel that it validated my own experience, and while my interpretation may be off, way off, or just completely mismatched from the creator's intentions, it's nice to have a work of art, or I suppose 3 works of art. It's nice to have a collection of art that feels like it mirrors my own experience, at least somewhat. I will include download links for the entire trilogy in the description, and I would love to hear alternative views, elaborations, and clarifications on metaphors I might have missed in the comments below. I honestly cannot recommend these 3 games more. They are so special. I can't describe the actual jump scare I had when I googled the Nazi guy's name and discovered all the stuff about him. I was fully ready to write some big long multi-paragraph dissection of what he wrote, and I just I was halfway through and I just curiously googled his name to I was well, I'm gonna need images for reference, and I should probably know a little bit more about who I'm talking about, and maybe I'll get some interesting, oh, he's a Nazi. Oh, and I mean, that was probably the biggest whiplash I have ever experienced while sitting indoors.